Well, actually, maybe before we record, it would be good just to. Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Lane. You've been someone who has contributed to Wikipedia for like so many years, and you have a depth of experience, and we're grateful to have a chance to brainstorm ideas with you around both image access for Wikipedia biographies and some ideas we have for carrying out a study with images we hope to be able to acquire. So maybe we can start off with some intros. And why don't you introduce yourself for us, Lane?
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Sarah. My name's Lane Rasberry. I'm Wikimedian in residence at the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia. In that role, I help everyone or anyone in the university who wants to add content to Wikipedia to do that. This could mean editing articles, which is the most conventional kind of university participation. It could also mean integrating media collections into Wikimedia Commons or Wikisource if it's a document. And I also do a lot with data sets, either taking university data sets and putting them into Wikidata, or helping somebody at the university who needs a general reference data set pull that out of Wikidata for whatever research they have. Thanks for having me.
Great. I'm Nathan Matias. I'm the founder of the Citizens and Technology Lab and an assistant professor here at Cornell. Sarah, could you introduce yourself?
Yep, my name is Sarah Gilbert. I am Cat Lab's research manager.
So Lane, we came to you because we're developing a possible research study. We're a research team that does systematic tests of the effects of different interventions into our digital lives. And we're talking to some Wikipedia contributors who had this really fascinating question about what the effect is on viewership of articles receiving an image. And particularly, this is a group that's trying to broaden the visibility and reach of biographies about women on the platform. And I think as researchers, we're interested in a variety of like women and LGBT biographies more generally. So one of the things that, as experimentalists, we often need a larger sample size, and so we want to, potentially find a large number of Wikipedia articles that are biographies that don't have images, and there are ways of doing that. But then we face this interesting challenge once we've made that list of articles that need images. There might even be photographs or images out there in the world of those people. But there's this challenge of actually getting those images, managing rights, and figuring out how to get them into articles. And I know these are things that you've thought deeply about. That's something we're curious to brainstorm with you on. And also, of course, if you have other ideas related to this kind of research idea, we'd be happy to talk further. But I imagine you get lots of questions about rights and also, biographies on Wikipedia.
There's a lot of ways that we could take this conversation. One, we could talk about the readership of Wikipedia and how does it respond to changes in articles. We could talk about Wikipedia biographies as a collection of Wikipedia. And even if something's not high traffic, like what do we do if an article is important? Like how would we detect that? And what can we say about serving audiences' needs? And we can also talk about outreach for images. Like what do we do if we want images for biographies where we don't otherwise have them? Different people have tried different things. I can think of a few projects where people have tried to address these questions. Where do you think we should begin? Or shall I suggest?
Yeah, why don't you suggest?
First thing I would think about considering what your theory of change is with regard to readership of Wikipedia. There's no one's written the review article about readership of Wikipedia, like what articles get traffic and under what circumstances. So there's articles here and there. Probably where this has been examined the most is in the field of medicine, because there's been different efforts to develop medical articles and see, for example, how does Wikipedia respond in a medical crisis? This has been looked at for Zika and Ebola, and especially COVID. There's also been examinations of whether medical students as a demographic read Wikipedia article. This was kind of a carryover from the advent of the internet 20 years ago, wondering, will professionals use the internet at all? Will students use the internet to get information that their professors aren't getting them? And what kind of information are people accessing? So I've read and I've looked for and read most of these articles about Wikipedia's audience and readership. I don't see people addressing some of the fundamental issues about how people think about readership of Wikipedia versus how they think about readership of other platforms. So supposing you've got this idea, you're going to add pictures and you think that that's going to drive traffic. I'm just telling you that's not a very Wikipedia community way of thinking, but that is a very common way of thinking in social media and new media. So if you want people to respond to your tweet in Twitter, you add a picture to it. So this is well established. There's hundreds of papers on that. And you could say the same thing about communities like Reddit or other social media communities. Pictures increase engagement. But a difference between the audience in Wikipedia and the audience in these other platforms, I'm going to make up words because we don't have enough researchers who look at Wikipedia. So I'm going to give you my own terms, but you're not going to find this in the literature anywhere. I would call Wikipedia search media, and I would call those other platforms subscription media. So if somebody gets a post in Twitter, it's because they've subscribed to the person who's making those posts at some point in the past. And when they go into Twitter, there's a feed of new media that's come in. Some of it's text and some of it's going to be text with images. But whatever the case, they've subscribed to everyone in the feed in the past. And that subscription, it's going to play out in their lives for years. Whereas when people consume Wikipedia, a lot of social media happens in that way, by that model. In Wikipedia, people don't arrive at articles in this way. I mean, very, very few. The usual way that people arrive in Wikipedia is because they've started in a search engine and they've specifically looked for something, and the search engine gave them results, and then they arrive on Wikipedia. And Google and Bing and DuckDuckGo, they don't advertise search engine results with pictures, not typically. People are typically clicking on
except
a text
for
link.
biographies.
It can happen for biographies.
That's why Wikipedian groups approached us with this idea, because they have this hypothesis that the info box that search engines produce about people, when you search for topics or about people, often those info boxes are drawn from Wikipedia graphics and linked to the Wikipedia biography for that person. And so their theory of change was that given the incoming search traffic for biographies, there could be potentially a small increase in viewership if people see that image appearing on the search results. So
that could be the case. It does appear in Google's knowledge graph, for example. And if there's an image that's uploaded to Wikimedia Commons and registered as the preferred image in Wikidata, then who knows Google's magic or how they decide these things, but it's more likely to appear in the knowledge graph. But something that Google can do that Wikipedia can't do, as you know, Wikipedia only accepts openly licensed, open access, free and open images, whereas Google, without regard to anything at all, they can take any picture they find on the internet, republish it in Google's website, don't give attribution to any authors. They don't have to concern themselves with these things. So Google Knowledge Graph largely consists of non-free images presented without permission from the copyright holder. So we could add Wikipedia free images to that, but I wouldn't, it's hard for me to think about how does this confound with Google getting to compete with us using non-free images and selecting what they want.
Yep, that's a really interesting question. I think when we put together the study, should it go forward, that's the kind of thing that we should factor in as a mediator, right? We can investigate what shows up in Google Knowledge Graph and look to see, for a given biography, does it have an entry in Knowledge Graph, even if an image entry in Google, even if it doesn't have an entry in Wikipedia. And that would actually give us the opportunity to get a pretty nice causal estimate of the impact of image uptake in Google's knowledge graph algorithm. So that's a really helpful thought for us as we brainstorm how to construct the experiment. It's not often that you can get that kind of level of this impact is because of this algorithm, and this might end up being one of those studies if we set it up right. So thank you for that. So I've interrupted you yet again, though.
It's difficult. So yeah, it's a puzzler with a lot of variables. Definitely wiki community talks about getting images from different places. There's a lot going on there. So if somebody's searching for somebody by name, one might expect that a certain amount of traffic gets driven to Wikipedia anyway. And so we in Wikipedia, we have data about how many people are going to Wikipedia articles. But something that we've always lacked, because Wikipedia is transparent, we publish all our traffic reports. You can find out how many people are going to any given Wikipedia article. There's not really other websites that compare to this. No one else will give us their traffic stats. Their Amazon Alexa, which I think shut down for traffic, or maybe I'm wrong about the news.
But
I think
it's not at the page level.
Yeah. Okay. ComScore, these other kinds of things, commercial services that somehow through bug trackers and people having reporting devices on their computers showing what they're watching, they aggregate how much traffic has come to different websites, not Wikipedia. But just looking at the Wikipedia article for a given topic, so this is broad, we're talking about every single concept in the world, every person, every medical condition, every household appliance, every famous animal, like everything that there's a Wikipedia article for. Sometimes in the Wikipedia community, this is said, and it's a bold statement, I'll say it right here. Wikipedia seems to be the world's most consulted source of information on every topic in every language for which there's a Wikipedia article. Okay, so if there's a Wikipedia article, Wikipedia seems to be, arguably is, already the most consulted source of information on that topic. So if that's actually the case, there's like a work balance to be made. If you're already the best in the world and you add an image and you get a certain amount better, then like, how do you judge whether it's worth being the best in the world versus 10% better than the best in the world? You know,
Yeah,
Wikipedia needs to keep its, yeah.
Here's what we've heard from folks like the Women in Red Project, right? So, you know, they're interested in, you know, not just creating a repository of knowledge that's available to people should they consult it. They have a broader mission of increasing like what we might call knowledge equity. So it matters actually what people know about the contributions of women to society. And it's not necessarily a zero-sum game. It's not like the more we know about women's contributions to society, the less we know about men. We have like systematic evidence for decades across journalism, across film, across, you know, academia, and also in the world of encyclopedias, including Wikipedia, that women's contributions are both undervalued and under-acknowledged in these information resources. And like one consequence of that has been that when women's contributions to society have been, people have been unaware or under-aware of women's contributions, which of course then we have, you know, decades of social science research showing that that has knock-on effects on the aspirations of women and other groups. And so the larger goal, I would say, from what we've heard talking to Wikipedia groups aimed at increasing both knowledge and awareness of women's contributions through Wikipedia, is that there's a societal benefit to greater knowledge equity. And one way to complement the amazing work that's being done to broaden the availability of information on Wikipedia is to do parallel work to broaden awareness of that content.
Let me ask this in another way. So like, to me, it seems like Wikipedia's strength, its greatest strength, is its accessibility. And we measure the accessibility by the page views and the number of people who go to it. The Wikimedia Foundation in the past, so it's hard to come up with these numbers, and the wiki community can't come up with these numbers by itself. But the Wikimedia Foundation, in multiple occasions in print, has said that the number of annual visitors to Wikipedia in a year is more than 1 billion. 1 billion unique visitors in a year. And these visitors, they're already going to these articles in great numbers. So Wikipedia's already, and besides the large audience, if we look at the number of women's biographies in Wikipedia, or not just women, we could look at any underserved demographic. We've got large collections of underserved demographic. And that's not to say there's not gaps and inequities and these kind of things. But if you compare Wikipedia to any other repository, we've got the most women's biographies, the most biographies for just about any underserved demographic that anyone's been able to name in the past 10 years since we started talking about this in Wikipedia. And those biographies, they seem to be the most consulted source of information for those people and for those groups. So like, if we're doing the best in the world, like we won the Olympic gold medal already, like what left is there to do? Like,
I guess it all matters whether someone cares about inequality or not, right? If inequality doesn't matter, then having an inequality curve that has some more resources for everyone, but there's still a huge inequality and disparity in society, might be seen as something you can rest on your laurels, right? If in year one you have like 20% women and like 80% men, and in year 10 you have, I'm not necessarily describing Wikipedia, 22% women, you might say, well, great, we're making progress. But if you care about equity,
yes.
then that may not be enough. And so I think that's where people look at the disparity between both the contributions that women have made to society and both available knowledge and public awareness. And they see that there's still work to be done. And I think that's something that a great number of Wikipedians care deeply about, which is why we as a research group, who like our whole reason for existence is to support online communities, include Wikipedians, to generate rigorous, reliable evidence to evaluate their efforts at change, are excited to support Wikipedians to test the effectiveness of the interventions they're doing on the outcomes that they care about.
All right, whatever the case, this is a worthwhile effort. I guess another direction I could go in this is talk more about medicine, which is more familiar to me. We've had a lot of health organizations.
Yeah, and I think it's a good parallel, right? Because you could say, Wikipedia is a widely consulted source. It has high quality information. But you could then look at all of the other sources of information that people might be looking for information about COVID, et cetera. And you might say, well, there's a societal value in making sure that more people access high quality information, even if Wikipedia is already a widely consulted source. There's value in getting more people to high quality information, even further yet. But go ahead.
Yeah, we've had people, so I'm making, this is kind of strange. You'd never have this conversation anywhere except Wikipedia. So you're talking about women's biographies and I'm talking about like the pandemic. And I'm saying they're the same thing. But so what we had a lot of health organizations come to Wikipedia. And the question we show them this traffic to all these COVID related articles. There's a couple thousand of them, variants of this. And they would have what's called, you could call it a public health campaign with key messages. And sometimes they would have infographics or other media trying to target particular audiences for different health messages. This has happened with COVID. This has happened with a great many health organizations coming to Wikipedia. And one of the questions they ask, and this might be useful information to you because I don't think there's an answer to this, is supposing you improve the quality of health information in any given Wikipedia article, or supposing you have a health campaign that's focusing on a disease or a community or some arbitrary set of Wikipedia articles, and you develop these articles by putting images in them, you put more references in them, you put more text in them, you have experts review them, then how will the traffic to those Wikipedia articles change? And I'm sure that there's no study that's been published that says interventions to Wikipedia make the traffic go up or down. That's not to say that it doesn't. It's just that there's no precedent of anyone looking for this. So if you were to answer this for biographies of women, I would be showing this to health organizations. Like if you could show that putting pictures in biographies of women would make traffic go up, I'd bring that to the health organizations and say, if you did a health campaign, that would probably make traffic go up again. I'd have to think about to what extent it's different. but it seems comparable to me. So it's a very common question you're asking.
Cool, that's great. I think methodologically, it's actually one of the simpler study designs we've considered and carried out on Wikipedia with Wikipedians. And so that actually makes me excited to hear that like the work we do to set this study up, should it happen, might also inform other research or other questions and answers that folks have. Because one of the things we endeavor to do at Cat Lab is to build not just individual studies, but also build the infrastructure that could be reused for other research. So we could totally imagine, were we to go ahead with this study and build the infrastructure and also the community processes to make sure that Wikipedians are okay and understand and informed and consent to the study, that a similar method could be applied to other domains. And I could totally see how you might expect different dynamics for different like topic areas or different audiences. So that's really interesting. And I think that's be something we'd be fascinated to explore. I'm curious, now that we're talking about this images question,
Yes.
One of the things that you need for experiment is a sufficiently large sample size. So you can imagine, for sake of our conversation, imagine a study where we have, let's say, 100 or 200 articles that we could improve in some way, and we, flip a coin, right, and decide half of them get that improvement, half of them do not get that improvement. We know that people might edit them in the meantime and all sorts of other things, but we've at least controlled our intervention. And then we could measure over a period of time, what the difference is in views or other metrics that we might care about. But for that to happen, we actually need 100 or 200 or however many improvable articles, and we also need to have at our disposal the resources that we would place into those articles to improve them. And in this conversation, we're thinking images, and we've talked to a number of folks, and it's well known that kind of securing copyright and changes for things to go into Wikimedia Commons is not always very easy. And so we've been talking to journalism organizations who have archives of images of all of their current and former staff. We've been talking to university PR teams who routinely take images, pictures of all of their faculty and staff, and may be convinced to make some of those images available under Creative Commons. And it's interesting, one of the common responses we've actually got in reaction to images of people has not been so much of a legal question. So I'm really interested to hear from you about how to think about those legal questions, because I'm sure we'll hit that point. It's also been this concern about the risks to people of kind of yielding control over who gets to use an image, where and when, for what purpose. So we're actually planning to do some survey work to better understand how people think about those risks and what those risks are. Because it would kind of be pretty terrible if we released a bunch of images of, say, women journalists onto Wikimedia Commons, and then it turned out that some of those people's concerns about like harassment or other things might come to pass because of how some of those images might be used. So that's something we're kind of exploring. But even as we do that, we're running into some of the common like copyright challenges. For whatever reason, an institution might want to retain control. So I'm curious to hear more about like, over the last decade, how those efforts have played out, and how people who want to do projects that might involve releasing a fair number of images into the commons might think about going about that work.
What you're talking about is either unprecedented, or if it's happened, it's been low profile for whatever reason. If it was larger, people wanted to keep it low profile. They did the upload and they didn't talk a lot about it or showcase it as an example to be replicated. Or maybe they did showcase it, but it was just so few pictures that it was low profile because the size wasn't large enough. So what we're talking about, here's the issue, and this would surprise anyone who's not a Wikipedian. You can't just go grab pictures off the internet and upload them to Wikipedia. You need permission from the copyright holder. The copyright holder is typically the photographer. One might ask if there's some institution that's got a presence in Wikipedia, like you're at a university, there's a Wikipedia category for Cornell people. And so many people at Cornell already have Wikipedia articles, I would guess hundreds. I'm at the University of Virginia. Many people at my university have Wikipedia articles. You can say this about any major university. And if you went to a university website, and I think this applies to every university in the world, I don't think we have a single example. Every university in the world says the entire website's under copyright. And then if you were to go into the communications office, as I have at my university, and ask, can I have pictures of all the professors? They've told me no for various reasons. Part of the reason is legal and copyright. Part of the reason is like, what would you do with these? If we sign over free and open copyright licenses to these, is someone going to Photoshop a cigarette in this person's mouth or whatever the case may be, something unsavory. We've got precedent in Wikipedia. Wikipedia community loves to gossip. If there's a problem anywhere, people tend to squeal. I would say we've had a few 100,000 people watching this for 20 years, and I've been observing these conversations for 10 years. I've never seen this be a problem. The fear is immense. So I would say for the ratio of fear of problem to actually existence of problem, it's got to be 100,000 to 1. Like 100,000 people are scared of this, and then like one person has a problem. I can think about, I've seen plenty of problems to Wikipedia articles. So there's complaint queues in different places in Wikipedia. I'm also a subscriber to something called the volunteer response team. We get complaints by email, which might be confidential or more private, or it's kind of a back end of complaints. So I've got a certain level of access to some complaints that people write in. Certainly in this volunteer response team email queue, we get a lot of complaints from universities. I've seen a lot of university central offices write in because there's some complaint about professor at that university. Besides, we don't have to think about universities. We could think about in the United States, if there's a work that's by a United States federal employee, then that's automatically in the public domain. So United States politicians are better represented visually, and political appointees better represented visually than any other country in the world. There's no other country in the world that gives us pictures of their politicians for free. If there's a politician in Wikipedia, then chances are that person traveled to the United States, got photographed by a United States government employee, and that's why we have a picture of them in Wikipedia. But one could imagine going to any group of public figures and doing this. Another group that I'll talk about, and this, I'll just say it, I'm not going to give commentary about it. People like celebrities. So there's celebrities in music and sports and TV stars and everything else. And one would think that if you're a PR agency for a celebrity, that it would be your job to make sure that pictures of this celebrity circulate freely around the internet and then people know something about it. And supposing you're a top celebrity and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have photographed you, you're on the cover of many magazines and TV and everything else in lots of movies. Wikipedia does not have a single relationship with any celebrity public relations agency. There is no public relations agency that gives us photographs of any celebrity. There's spotty donations here and there. If I had to guess what's happening, and it's hard for me to read the room about what's happening, but I think that certain celebrities ask their PR agent to send a photo to Wikipedia. That's very uncommon. But typically what Wikipedia has, the photos of a celebrity, is someone has caught them in public, taken a bad picture of them with the phone, uploaded it to the Wikipedia article, and what do you know? That's the picture of the celebrity that gets in circulation for their entire career. It's the most popular photo of them. It baffles me that this is the way things are, that somebody could be paying someone, a team of people to promote them, and then the most circulated photo of them is a fan's cell phone picture taken while they were walking by. But that happens. So when you're asking where to get these collections of photos, unprecedented. Will people complain? Yes, everyone will complain. how valid are their complaints? I think it's a certain amount of fear that's unwarranted. Can things go wrong with Wikipedia? Yes, definitely. Some people have had big problems with Wikipedia. Are those complaints related to the pictures? I struggle to think of a single case like that.
That's really helpful to hear. I think that might actually be useful knowledge to take to some of these organizations. I think another thing is that we do see changes over time in who's in these PR departments, and Wikipedia is no longer as young as it was, and it's now kind of an accepted part of the information commons. So we may strike out, or we might find that folks are really eager in ways that might have not been true in the past. We spoke to one PR professional earlier this week, and they were like, yes, this is something I've wrestled with myself and actually would love to convince my employer to change, right? And so I would like to believe, and I'm hoping that there might be some new pathways. The other thing is we found in some cases there are employees at organizations who are willing to survey their peers who have Wikipedia articles and ask them to share a personal photo that could go onto Wikipedia, where we might not get everyone in that organization from that organization, but they're willing to kind of use their email list within the organization to send out a survey and invite people to donate a personal photo to the commons. And so that's another strategy we're going to explore as a possibility.
There's no guide for donating your photo to Wikipedia. So that's like a thing that could be written. So if somebody wrote a university targeted guide or a celebrity targeted guide or whatever the case may be, and it's a one pager and it said, do you want your photo on Wikipedia? Here's the instructions for doing it. That's a thing that has not been done. It could be done. And if it got in the right hands, maybe it could have impact at scale. That might be timely.
That's really helpful to hear.
Yeah.
The other thought is that, this is one reason we thought another reason we thought this study would be helpful, right? If we discover that adding obviously if we discover that adding an image to a biography has zero effect at all, other than just, improving the photo you have on Wikipedia, it still could be worthwhile. But if we do see a difference in traffic, that could be valuable rhetorical justification with PR teams and other institutional decision makers around the cost benefit of doing something like this, because it may cost them a little bit more with the photographers to be able to license those images on under a Creative Commons license.
We'll see where things are going. Some contemporary conversations. Wikipedia community has said, how are we going to illustrate every single article in Wikipedia? And we've asked these things about biographies. So this has been an ongoing conversation. There's a few examples where artists have drawn or created or whatever the case made Wikipedia articles about biographical figures and put them in there when they couldn't otherwise get an illustration. So that's been a thing. Something that people are looking forward to, or conversations that are happening right now, is what's going to happen with AI. Supposing you have 10 pictures of a person, you put them into the robot, and the robot generates a likeness of the person in an original pose and gives you the copyright. Do we even need to take photos if we can just download and spit them out through some kind of meat grinder that generates new photos? So I would expect that that's something that the Wikipedia community, it's already being experimented with, and I think that's a direction that in which the Wikipedia community intends to go.
This is the photo you get unless you give us a better one.
That's how it is anyway. We're already putting random cell phone photos of so many people. They're very highly paid people who seem to care about their image, and it's just some weird cell phone photo illustrates them in Wikipedia for 5 years.
So I'm curious, Elaine, I know that not all image that is submitted to the Commons gets accepted. So for us and for other people who are thinking about potentially adding in a larger number of images, are there things that we should be thoughtful about? I'm sure there are a number of guides that can help people avoid like the obvious things that would lead to something being quite reasonably rejected. But are there like high level things that anyone should be thinking about if they're contemplating adding, dozens or hundreds of images to the comments?
The most obvious thing is make sure that you control the copyright and make sure that that's legitimate, because there's a lot of times when the wiki community questions institutions about copyright. I'll just be blunt with you. Reputable organizations that you think would have their act together often lie. They just outright lie about having the copyright. And wiki community does not like it when an organization like a university donates photos to Wikipedia, and then the photographer comes behind them and they've run their own scan of their own photos and said, hey, you have this certain license, and actually this is my copyright. So we've seen this from universities. We've seen a lot with museums. So like the museum photographer photographing different sculptures and things, and then they come back and complain. We've seen this in all kinds of fields. So don't only check the boxes with Wikipedia, like have some self-respect. Make sure you legitimately own the copyright for these things, because Wikipedia is a community that's actually going to check. And not saying anything's going to go bad with it, but everything in Wikipedia is transparent, and no one's tallied this, no one's done the research, but we know every time an institution has misbehaved in Wikipedia, and it goes back all the way to the beginning.
It wastes the time of volunteers who are
consumes
doing
the
this as
time
a
of
labor of love.
volunteers. Yeah, and that never goes away. That's a permanent record. Like no one's made anything of this, but like every little argument that an organization has with a wiki community member who says, cite your sources and like show that you have copyright, that's a record. So behave.
Good advice. What else would you encourage us to be thinking about in terms of like images or process in respect to a project of this kind? It could be some future potential or some roadblock we should be careful to avoid or manage.
Well, you've been talking about, I presume are you referring to English Wikipedia, or what did you have in mind? Are you going to put these in English Wikipedia articles, or are you going the Wikidata route? Should we say anything about that?
So we've been talking to groups that I think would be open to taking a Wikidata route. I think for us, the important thing would be to, we're most interested in like contributing in the broadest possible way that also allows us to do a valid study, right? So for example, if contributing to multiple language Wikipedias or like to Wikidata allows us to look at the effects across different audiences, that could be really, really compelling. Also, my headphones have told me my battery is low, so I have a little bit of time, but I'm going to swap headphones in just a second.
Okay.
In fact, maybe I should just do that now, so it's not a surprise.
All connected? Nate, you hear me? Are you here?
Okay, I'm with you now.
You're here? Okay.
Thanks.
The project, the overall project that you're talking about, like everybody wants to come up with applications first, and I encourage you to do that. We need to have practical results as soon as possible, but we are missing some fundamental research. And if we had that fundamental research, then your project and a lot of other projects would go more smoothly. So one of the research papers we're mentioning is missing is the effects of editing Wikipedia articles and the effects on traffic. Some of the other things are, I would say, looking at the newness of Wikipedia articles and when they have an impact. So we have one of the ways that you're looking at this is if we add new articles, will more people go to those articles? Something else that we can be looking at is if you make new articles at all, like put new articles in an area, will that bring in entirely new communities to Wikipedia? So that's not the same as getting more attention from existing internet users. But if you go into lower and middle income countries and you build out enough articles and they're of a certain quality, will you get entirely new people starting to use the internet where they didn't before? I can't, the wiki community speculates in this space. We don't have hard information about what this looks like, but if somebody uploads a picture to Wikimedia Commons, which is the non-text media repository for the wiki platform, and almost every image in English Wikipedia is coming from Wikimedia Commons, but of all the things that translate well, photographs translate very well. The same article that's good for English is good for Spanish, is good for Hindi, and is good for every other language. So if your goal was to get more information, get more attention from English speakers, then do it. It doesn't matter much how you do it. You can put it in Wikidata or put it in English Wikipedia. I don't think it would make much difference. In Wikidata, they ask you to select one image of all the images of a person and say that that's the most prominent image. Whereas in English Wikipedia, you can put multiple images in. I think you're mostly looking at articles that have no image at all. So
That's correct.
Would be the only one. If we're talking about underserved communities or communities that don't engage much with Wikipedia, I wonder what kind of audience you would get if you were to put things in Wikidata, start translations, even if they're 3-sentence biographies, like you have a full built out biography in English Wikipedia and you complemented some other languages with 3-sentence biographies, then that would mean establishing new Wikipedia articles, but you'd also get to showcase that image to an underserved community. So say, for example, you had someone at the university and they're multinational or they're hired from another country. So we're in the United States, but you make a commitment that if you're showing a university professor's image in their Wikipedia article, then you'll assist them with making an article in their native language or the language of their home country. Then that could be another way to get a kind of impact. And the wiki community doesn't often have the resources or the infrastructure to organize in that way. Whereas with you being at a university, you might have some support to be able to do this and have an impact in new ways that the wiki community hasn't even imagined or considered.
I love that idea. We've had, in the past, we've collaborated with Wiki in Africa on projects aimed at increasing image contribution during the Wiki Loves Africa competition.
Yes.
And I think there would be a really interesting, conversation, without committing any third party who's not in this call. I think it would be a really interesting conversation to have, because you're totally right. I think about my own family heritage in the Western Highlands of Guatemala, and there are some, Wikipedia articles about those parts of the world in English, some in Spanish, and some attempts to bring, create indigenous wikis as well. But in those contexts where, participation and available knowledge is, there's a smaller collection, like each contribution can potentially make a big difference. And I love the idea of, thinking about ways to systematically evaluate that, as researchers. So I'm going to do some more thinking about that idea. Thank you for that.
We've got a lot that we can export from Wikidata. So if somebody's already has a Wikipedia article, they're going to have a Wikidata item. The Wikidata item is structured data about them. And lots of conversations about this. The wiki community doesn't know how to digest or talk about this issue, but a certain amount of demographic profiling happens in both Wikipedia and Wikidata. So something that's pretty easy to do is for any arbitrary set of biographies, like when you're doing this intervention, you can say, show me all the biographies that are from, say, a person who was born in South America. That's a query that you can do, and then you can get out that slice. But there's infinite ways to slice what you're doing to see, is the impact in one community different from another, or where I'd be curious. Like my guess is that if you add these pictures, in some places you're not going to detect increased traffic, or it's not going to be, or there's going to be much differences. Like some places you're going to have impact, and some places you're going to have less impact. You might have impact everywhere. I can't even imagine, but I do think that there's going to be variance, like certain demographics of people have more impact than others.
This conversation makes me think, because whenever we think about like audience effects, like we think about the chain, this like sequence of things that have to be true in order for someone to actually encounter a piece of information, right?
Yeah.
And in the search model, right, it's not just that the information is there, it's not just that, say, Google is providing it, but it's also that a person is engaging in some kind of search. And thinking through that whole chain ends up being useful as we design a study. And this actually makes me think that we might want to incorporate data from Google search trends into our study design, right? If we know that like person A actually does get searched for in language B, and they don't have an image, then we might expect a different outcome for that person compared to someone who has a bio, it's not searched for very often, and just putting more information there might be good in some like sense for the small number of people, but you might expect to see less of an effect in that case, unless you're doing things to also drive attention proactively. So that's really helpful for us to think about.
Yeah.
Sarah, are you raising your hand out of excitement and interest?
Oh, no, I was just thinking, because we're talking about like the ways that we like access information through Wikipedia and how that like is going to impact the like, you know, the visibility and how we're going to incorporate that in the design. And I guess I was just wondering if like how much is known about like Wikipedia rabbit holes, and like when you go into Wikipedia and then you get stuck because you're clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking. And if that's, and like if we could look at some of the bios and the links into them, if that would have an effect, like somebody that doesn't have very many links into them or is not linked out to, or whatever the proper sort of terms are in the sort of the wiki world, like if that would have an effect either, or if that's something that we should be thinking about.
The reason why we don't have that kind of study is because it takes tracking on the end user's device. So inside Wikipedia, there's no tracking of how all the users navigate from one article to another. That's not even data that the Wikimedia Foundation would give. They've done limited studies and they share this data in very limited ways, but that's not data that's freely available. And that's different from other websites that track people every which way that they possibly can. So we don't have that kind of data in Wiki.
That actually, go ahead, then I have a question, Lane.
Okay, just conventional thought about wiki rabbit holes is that, and incoming links, so this may not be true, but like this is the conversations that I've had with wiki community in the absence of a lot of data. And that is that although users report having fun with wiki rabbit holes and navigating around Wikipedia, we don't think that's a significant driver of traffic. The significant driver of traffic is the jump from a search engine into Wikipedia, not interlinks through Wikipedia. And Nate.
On that theme, I wonder if I know that Wikipedia on the desktop version at least now has the preview. When you put your mouse cursor over a link, it will show you something about the article. You know, I know that that's not something that people see on mobile, which is ever more an important.
More than half the users, yeah.
Yeah, but I wonder if the foundation has done any A/B testing on the inclusion of the image in that preview or not. That's something from us maybe to do some digging and asking around, which might.
I don't know that.
So I realize we've got just a few more minutes. I'm curious, Lane, if you have any kind of final thoughts or questions for us to consider, ideas, or also, it sounds like you've tried with UVA a number of times, but if we get our IRB approved, would you be open to allowing us to knock on that door one more time?
Yes, please. Yes, I'd like to give it another go. I've been at my university for a while. I would like to get more images of people who already have Wikipedia articles in Wikipedia. I think it's there's some controversy in Wikipedia about promotion, but it's not about my university. I want every university. If somebody has a Wikipedia article, I just generally advocate that the organization that has a person, they should provide Wikipedia articles of that person. That's, every movie, every sport, like every sports player. What if we had that for every sports player from every team in the world, or every university professor has a Wikipedia article, every politician in the world? That's highly demanded. I wish, and I think it's in everybody's benefit to get that. I'd love to participate in that.
Well, thank you. I think that's the beautiful thing about contributing to Wikipedia, that this kind of common resource that we all benefit so much from. And we're so grateful to you for taking the time to talk through this idea with us. My brain is sparking with ideas. I can see Sarah like just thinking, which is fantastic. And yeah, we'll reach out as we have other questions. And thank you so much for generously sharing the time. And we'll do some editing, and hopefully some of this is useful for other people who want to have questions about images and rights and how to put them, how to get institutions to think in different ways, and how to follow good practice when contributing them to the commons.
You're addressing multiple big issues that have been a concern for the wiki community for a long time. I really appreciate that, and I want to support you guys any way that you can. And other universities, they should do that too. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Lane. Take care.